I noticed the man because he smiled like someone who had been told a secret about my day. The cafe was warm, rain on the windows, milk steam curling like small weather over cups. I was there with a notebook and an errand list, and the private plan to call my mother after work about a trip I had not yet announced. The man stood by the sugar station and said my full name with care, not the quick version friends use, the long version from report cards and legal forms. I looked at him as a person looks at a mistake, ready to say that I was not whoever he meant. He asked if my train had been on time from the station I use on weekdays. He said my office would be busy ahead of the quarterly report. He mentioned the community garden by the river, and asked whether the rosemary had survived the frost last winter. I put my cup down because my hands had begun to feel like they belonged to someone else. He did not look like a man who enjoyed fear. He looked like a man who was used to being believed. I asked how he knew my name, and he said public records, donation rolls, volunteer notices, local news captions, court schedules, alumni newsletters, board minutes, and the many lists that carry lives from one column to another. Then he said a sentence that turned the room a few degrees. He said your parents must be very proud, although it is possible they would not know some of these pieces, since parents tend to keep one version of a child, the version that fits inside the family frame. I stepped back because the sentence had landed close. My mother calls nightly and asks what I ate and whether I am sleeping, but there are parts of the map she does not read. The man did not reach toward me. He said, I can show you, or I can walk away. I said, show me one thing only. He said the neighborhood association had posted minutes last spring, and my name appeared with a phone number under a volunteer line. He said a council subcommittee had posted a meeting packet with a sign-in sheet, and my name sat beside the words public comment. He said a 5-mile charity run listed my finishing time, and that the name of my employer appeared as a small sponsor on the banner behind the award table. I took a breath that felt like a new job, and I said that was enough. He nodded and left his card on the counter with a quiet apology for the method. Then he walked into the rain without waiting for a reply. I carried my cup outside and stood under the awning and watched the bus sigh at the curb. I opened my phone and searched my own name without care and found a field of pages like a deck thrown in a hurry. There were festival rosters, meeting notices, choir programs from a winter concert, a bake sale flyer posted by a school where I had once staffed a table. I thought about my mother, who saves paper letters in a box, who knows the birthdays, the anniversaries, and the favored brand of tea, and who would not know the last time I spoke in a room with a microphone, or the date I joined the committee that keeps the park lights working. I walked to work and tried to place my steps inside sentences that would make sense later. At lunch, I called my friend Noor and told her the short version. She said a map is not a life, but a map can be a power. She said, decide what you want from this, then decide what to tell and what to keep. I nodded as if she could see me through the line. Then I hung up and opened a blank page and made a list that was not a confession and not a defense. It was only a record of what lived where. I did not yet know what I would do with it. The next day, I went back to the cafe, because staying away would turn the place into a fear, and I do not feed fears. The man was not there. The room held only the regular chorus of cups and keys and weather talk. I sat by the window and opened the list I had made. I wrote the sources as far as I could recall them. Neighborhood minutes, garden roster, alumni update page, city permits with public comment lines, the charity run page with a long list of finishers, photo captions from a small festival where we had painted benches and clapped for a brass band. I opened each page and read it like a stranger would. I saw my name joined to dates and places and roles. I saw where my number had been posted for years. I saw the email that I used for volunteer notes living beside my home street in a packet that had once been printed and stacked on a table in a gym. I closed my laptop and counted my breaths until I could stand the room again. At lunch, I walked the long way to the river and thought about my mother and father. My father keeps the car running and the gutters clear. He keeps the family in shape with wrenches and lists. He does not search the internet for minutes that mention the people he loves. My mother keeps birthdays and recipes and the stories of our neighbors. She is a keeper of rooms. She is not a hunter of public documents. It felt possible that a stranger could collect the public parts of me and know bones of a schedule my parents could not name. Not because they did not care, but because they did not read their daughter in the language that a clerk writes. I met Noor after work at a small place that sells soup and quiet. I told her more, and she listened without trying to solve me. She said the man was a symptom, not the story. She said the story would be what I did next with the knowledge that my life could be read by a city that does not know me, and by parents who love me without reading that city. I decided to meet the man again, on my terms, in daylight. His card had a number and a simple address for an office on the 3rd floor of a brick building near the station. I called and left a message that said I would meet him in the lobby and only in the lobby. He texted a time and said he would bring a list for me to review so I could confirm what was correct and what was not. On Saturday, I told my mother that I could not come for breakfast because I had an errand. She asked if I needed her help. I said no and thanked her for the offer. The lobby smelled like paper and old paint. The man brought a folder with printed pages and a pen. He said I could tear up anything that felt like it did not belong on the same table as my name. I read slowly. He had gathered more than the small list I had made. He had my business registration for a freelance project from years ago. He had a scanned agenda from a school board meeting where public comment included my sentence about a safe crossing near the park. He had the roster from the choir that sang every second Thursday in winter. He did not have anything that was not public. Nothing came from a password. Nothing came from an ear pressed to a door. I tore up a page where my phone number sat under a bold header that named a committee that had dissolved 2 summers ago. He nodded and said he would email the association to ask them to redact. He showed me a page that was wrong. A woman with my name had a citation for a parking violation. He had placed a sticky note on it that said not her. He slid the folder to me and said I could keep the stack. He said he had not come to scare me. He said he had a habit of showing people what could be seen so that they would be careful with what they post and what they sign. I said my mother would be frightened by the scale. He said my mother loved a person, not a list. He said I could bring the list to her anyway. I thanked him and left with the folder in my bag like a stone. The first person I told was not my mother. It was Noor, because Noor knows how to turn a problem into a plan that does not erase the feeling. We sat at my table with tea and the folder. I read aloud what a stranger could read. We made a small map of what to redact and who to ask. We highlighted places that had posted numbers and we wrote letters that asked for removal. We noted where edits had already happened and where the archive would keep a version that could not be pulled back. We did not let that part break us. We put sticky notes on the pages that needed my voice, and we set a timer and wrote emails in simple sentences. My name appears on this list with a phone number. Please remove the number. My home street appears in this packet. Please redact the street. My email is listed on this page. Please replace it with a general contact. We sent the messages and made a list of who had replied. Then we ate soup and watched the timer circle on the oven and said nothing for a while, because plans need silence after they land. The next morning, my mother called while I was sweeping the floor. She asked how my errand had gone. I told her I wanted to show her something, and that it would take some time, and that I did not want her to worry. She said she was already worrying because that is a skill mothers perfect without trying. And I said, then come over and we will look together. She arrived with a container of rice and a small plant from her window. She put the plant on my sill and the rice on my stove and her bag by her chair, and she folded her hands the way she does when she expects something to require both care and patience. I placed the folder on the table. I said, this is a list of pages that name me in public places. I said none of this came from a password. I said a stranger brought this to me to show me how much of my life can be read. My mother does not like paper that does not come with a recipe, but she does not run from it either. She took a deep breath and began to read. She read the run list and smiled at the time, which was slower than hers in her youth by a small margin. She read the garden roster and said she was happy I had chosen rosemary over mint that year. She read the meeting minutes and frowned at the line where my phone number sat like a spoon left on a counter. She said she did not like that, and I said I had written to ask for removal, and she nodded. She read the choir program and told me about the winter she had sung in a group that met in a classroom with bad heat and good joy. She read the business registration and looked up and said she had not known I had made a small business that year. I said I had told her I had a big client and wanted a separate account, and she said she had forgotten that detail and she was sorry. We sat with the pages until they felt less like a threat and more like a mirror, a flawed one, but still useful. She asked why a stranger would collect this. I said he wanted to show me what could be seen. She asked if he wanted money. I said no. She asked if I was frightened. I said I was careful. Then I put the folder away and we ate rice and talked about the plant. The plant was an herb that did not mind a bright window and a light hand with the water. It felt like a symbol only because we were both in the mood to allow one. The next wave of the story arrived as replies from the offices that guard the pages. The neighborhood association thanked me and said they would redact numbers and use a rotating contact form. The garden team said they had moved to a system that masked emails and that they were sorry the old page was still up. They would fix it that day. The choir director was delighted to hear from me and told me they were posting programs with only first names, and would I consider singing again in winter. The city clerk replied with a careful sentence about the public record and the role of archives in a democracy. The clerk said they could annotate a packet to remove a phone number, but the old version would likely live in the archive with the date. I wrote back to say that I understood and asked that the annotation be clear and placed near the number in a way that could be seen by a person with a tired screen and tired eyes. The clerk replied in a way that said this was not the first time a citizen had asked a city to remember the shape of a person inside a file. Noor and I kept the list updated and we set reminders for follow-ups because systems need nudges. I called my father and told him I had a small project related to the way names appear in public places. He said that sounded like a sentence from a book and asked whether I needed help with a ladder or a tool. I told him I did not. He said he would be in the garage if I changed my mind. I drove over with the herb and the folder and the plant on the seat beside me, and I sat with my parents in their kitchen. I explained again what a stranger had shown me, and I tried to keep my voice calm and plain. My father did not like the part about the phone number on a packet from a meeting. He said a city should protect its people with more care. My mother did not like the part about the roster that had not been pruned. She said volunteers should not have to pay with privacy. I told them we had asked for changes and that some had already been made. I told them that the biggest change would be inside the way we share. My mother asked what that meant. I said it meant I would post fewer full names in group photos. I said it meant I would ask before I listed numbers. I said it meant I would use a separate number for volunteer work that did not lead to my front door. My father nodded like a man who respects a plan that uses tools he understands. My mother asked if I thought the stranger had meant harm. I said I did not know, and that I no longer needed to decide. She looked at the plant and said she would like a cutting. We watered the plant and placed it on the sill, and the room felt like a place where the story could rest for a while. I might have ended the work there if the next incident had not made the matter personal for my mother. A week later, she received a call from a person who said they were with a charity that she knows by name. The caller thanked her for her support and asked for an updated card number. My mother is a careful donor and she keeps a pencil ledger of gifts in a small book. She told the caller she would not share her card and that she would mail a check only if the request arrived with a letter. The caller pushed and my mother ended the call. She felt uneasy. She called me and told me what had happened. I searched the number and found a page where many people had reported that the number had been used for a scam. My mother sat at her table with her ledger and said she felt foolish anyway. I told her that caution is not foolishness. I told her that a map can be used to find good places and bad ones. I told her that we had already begun to make our map harder to misuse. Together we called the real charity and reported the call. The woman on the line was grateful and said they had been trying to warn their donors. My mother hung up and said she wanted to know what else could be done. I said I could ask the man from the cafe whether he had advice for people like us. My mother surprised me by saying she would like to meet him once. I wrote to his email and said I would meet him in the cafe, and that my mother would join, and that we would not go anywhere else. He agreed and arrived with the same careful manner. He shook my mother's hand and said her name and sat only when we asked. He said he tries to teach people how to read the public pages with the same care that people use when they lock a door. He said the line between public and private had thinned where convenience has made a village out of a city. He suggested a simple list that my mother wrote in her ledger. Use a separate address for volunteer lists. Ask for initials only on rosters. Ask groups to use forms that mask numbers. Search your own name and ask for edits where possible. Treat phone calls as guilty until proven true. Call back only through a number published on a letter or a known site. He did not speak like a vendor. He spoke like a person who watches weather and tells his neighbors when a storm is coming. My mother thanked him and then surprised him by offering him a small box of cookies she had brought. He left without trying to sell anything. My mother looked at me and said she had learned something that she should have learned sooner. She said she had thought that the problem belonged to people who overshared without thinking. She said now she understood that being found is not only a matter of what a person posts, but also a matter of how many lists a city makes. We walked home and put the ledger away and made tea, and my mother asked me to tell her about the meeting where I had spoken about the crossing by the park. I told her the whole story. She listened and asked follow-up questions that made me feel like the subject and not the footnote. The last part of the story took longer and felt quieter. We waited for edits to land. Some pages changed. Some pages added notes. Some pages did nothing. And we learned to live with the residue of an older way. I built a small site that collected links to the places where people should write for edits, and I shared it with the garden and the choir and the neighborhood board. I kept the tone friendly. I wrote simple sentences. If your page lists the names of volunteers, consider first names only. If you must list numbers, use a central number and not personal phones. If you publish minutes, redact home streets. I did not preach. I posted the site once in a group chat and left it there for people to use when they had a reason. My parents learned the new habits too. My mother asked my permission before posting photos from dinner. My father stopped writing surnames on labels he leaves by the curb for the donation truck. My brother rolled his eyes at the new caution, then called me at midnight after a message from a stranger arrived with too many details about where he parks his bike. I told him he could lock the bike better and also lock the map a bit. He said he would, and the next day he did. Months passed. The folder lost its urgency and became a file. The plant on the sill grew a steady line of leaves. The stranger from the cafe sent a short note once to say a class at the library was teaching people how to search themselves and fix what could be fixed. He wrote that he would be there, and that the class would use my small site as a handout. I sent the note to my mother. She and I walked to the library and sat in a room with a circle of chairs. The class was full of neighbors. People who looked like they knew about gutters and recipes and school pickups. Not like they knew about archives and forms. A librarian showed the group how to search, how to ask, how to set alerts for their own names. The man from the cafe spoke for 5 minutes and then sat down. He did not hand out cards. He answered questions. My mother asked whether there was a simple rule she could teach to her friends who do not like screens. He said yes. He said treat your name like your front door. Share it with welcome and with decision. My mother wrote that line at the top of her ledger. After the class, we walked home. She asked me again about the park crossing. And I told her that more people used it now since the lights were fixed, and that a woman had stopped me the other day to say thank you for speaking in that room. My mother said she was proud that I had stood and said the thing that needed to be said. She said she would have liked to be there. I said next time. And I meant it. The next time I spoke in a room, I looked up and saw my mother in the third row with her hands folded and her face open. I said my sentence, and the room shifted a little. And afterward, my mother took my arm, and we walked out into a city that now knew a little less and a little more, which felt like the right balance for a life that belongs to a person and not to a list.